All right. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to record this lecture just to kind of do a brief-ish overview regarding Nietzsche to help kind of get you all more familiar with high-level philosophy and postmodern theories. And I want to focus on Nietzsche mostly because his theorizing is what gave birth to a lot of the thinkers that you see in debate. So Deleuze is very much predicated off of Nietzsche's idea that there is no singular truth, that it's all that all of our understandings of the world and power itself is very much displaced. There is no singular point. Heidegger takes on the idea of being as relative as we are our perceptions, and that our realities are constructed from those perceptions. Irigaray herself was very much just a student of Nietzsche. Her master's was on Nietzsche, and her first book was itself a reflection of Nietzsche and how feminism, operates within him. So I think that to start off, we need to, not look at Nietzsche, but look at what preceded him and what were the foundations that allowed for the ideas of deconstruction and this almost rebuilding of philosophy to occur. Because the common phrase amongst most Nietzsche scholars when they talk about him is that he is philosophy with a hammer. That he is breaking down a lot of the institutions that that existed. And to know what was being brought down, you kind of need to know a little bit about the period of philosophy that's known as the Enlightenment. And so the Enlightenment was a time that started during the Renaissance, was very much pioneered by thinkers like Immanuel Kant, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Hume. All of these other thinkers are very much placed within the Enlightenment, and you can kind of understand who is an Enlightenment theorist based off of a couple of different traits that they all share. So the most common one, and the one that Nietzsche is critical of the most, is the philosophies of Immanuel Kant. And so Kant kind of theorized, and is most notable for theorizing, that ethics is not based off of feeling. That the way in which we determine what is ethical and how we ought to act is by, first of all, seeing people as ends in themselves. So you might be familiar with utilitarianism, which is a theory that posits that we should be acting for the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. That the good is a result of how we act towards others. So, for instance, like the famous trolley problem is that you would kill one person to save the lives of 5 others. That you are always trying to maximize the life of the most amount of people, essentially. And so that's where a lot of policy affirmatives get their impact framing from, is that nuclear war outweighs any other impact. And this theory was really popularized by John Stuart Mill, and he actually came up with impact analysis and cost-benefit analysis, where it is the magnitude times the probability of something occurring makes our decisions and our actions regarding it possible. This calculus is what drives your actions. So Kant doesn't think that this is necessarily correct. He thinks that there's a lot more that goes into our decision-making when it comes to how we interact with others. He thinks that, you should always be focusing on how your actions impact another. And this comes from, how you frame this is through your rationality. Kant thinks that what separates humans from other animals is our ability to have higher level thinking, for our ability to reflect on our own actions. A lot of the focus is placed on what is logical, what is rational. One of the easiest examples of Kant's ethics is thinking about would you lie to someone? It's obviously irrational to tell a non-truth. And it's also unethical to give someone false information. Therefore, you probably shouldn't lie to someone. It's also immoral to kill someone. You're stopping their life. all these other things, like, these go into this decision-making calculus. This is, commonly referred to in debate as deontology, where we should probably focus on other levels of violence or acts against others, aside from just, the binary of life and death. We should think about how we treat others, how we think about other people. The decision-making calculus of probability and magnitude isn't really all that important if people are being treated poorly, and we should try to maximize our, I don't want to say care, but maximize the interest of others. If we view people as ends in themselves instead of, the life that is saved, there are different questions and different ways in which we evaluate situations. And so Kant wants us to move away from that kind of utilitarian decision-making calculus towards, that which is deontological. And for Kant, this is also very cold in the same way that it is with Mill, where you don't act because you care for someone, you act because it is the rational thing to do. If I were to go visit a friend in the hospital after they had just been in a really bad accident, and they were like, oh, thank you so much for seeing me, like, you really care about me, my response as a good Kantian would be, no, I don't care about you, I am just ensuring that you are still alive and that you're able to function. I will help you get back to your functionality as soon as possible, but it is not because of an idea of care, it is because it is rational for me to want to ensure that you are alive. So, like, there are some very weird kind of situations that occur under a Kantian framing of ethics. And we'll get a little bit more into some of the nuances of ethics, and that's kind of, as an aside, this is what I want to frame the most, because I think that with a lot of philosophical arguments, people get caught up on the link level, pretty much, like just the link alternative level, and they kind of forget a little bit of the framing, which I think has some pretty good nuanced debates that are really underutilized in debate. That's for a little bit later. Anyways, I want to continue by talking about, why Nietzsche thinks that this is wrong. And a lot of thinkers from, the 1900s on, who are kind of like, we can call them students of Nietzsche, really do think that there is something that is lost in hyper-rationality, and, there are things that we default to under this rational paradigm. So one of the biggest things is that rationality doesn't necessarily encapsulate what it means to be human or to act. Is it good to be rational? I mean, sure, there are a lot of situations in which, rationality allows for you to, make the best decision in math or in calculus or philosophy sometimes, sciences. Like, those things probably do require a little bit of rationality, and I don't want to take that away from them. But let's think a little bit about politics. And, specifically in the 1940s and during World War II, a lot of philosophers kind of theorized that many of the devastating and catastrophic events that happened under Germany's regime were caused by massive rational decisions that, and rational in the sense that they were, made purely without emotion, that they were very calculated and very much centered around how do we maximize the ability to rally the people of Germany, how do we ensure effective planning of taking over Europe, and all of these other factors and events that did occur. It is very much blamed on this idea of maximizing a lot of the utility and a lot of the laws of the time. In fact, one of the common questions of philosophers that still comes up in university courses today is using Kant's ethics against what would be deemed an ethical action of having an SS officer go to the home of a family harboring a Jewish family and asking, is there anyone of Jewish descent in this house? And so Kant would say, you do not lie, that you need to tell the truth, because one, if you are violating the law, that's irrational, and two, as I talked about earlier, you're still lying. You are still enacting a lie against the person who you are speaking to right now. And sure, there are deontologists who would argue that, you probably also have an obligation to the people who are hiding in your house, but at the same time, don't you also have an obligation to the officer who you're speaking to right now? And so this kind of ethics, it can be defensible under very totalitarian or authoritarian and fascist regimes. And to theorists like Nietzsche and other people, that's indefensible. If your theory is able to be utilized by fascism, then there is, very little salvation. There's very little that you ought to think about with those theorists. And so that's one of the aspects of why Nietzsche and these other thinkers wanted to move away from the ideas of the Enlightenment, why they saw there to be a lot of lacking in the Enlightenment. And I don't want to make this a blanket argument for why Enlightenment theories are de facto wrong. I think there's a lot of intellectual benefit for it, and we'll talk about those later on, because I do think that one of the best defenses against postmodern, these kind of higher order theories, is actually through some of the American theorists that come from a lot of Enlightenment school of thoughts, which is kind of the school of American pragmatism. So I kind of danced around it a little bit. Let's just kind of get into Nietzsche. Let's start talking about who Nietzsche was and why he is so influential, even into the corners of debate. And this is a lot to talk about in kind of a short amount of time. But I think that the most important aspect of Nietzsche that should be understood is that truth doesn't work all the time. And that itself is part true, part not. Because Nietzsche, probably even believes that sense to be true, which, everything with Nietzsche is very much, it can be and it also can't be. But for Nietzsche, the idea that there is one singular truth is countered by the very famous sentence, part of the parable of the old man in the town, which is that, God is dead. And that's not to say, to mean the edgy teenager saying, oh, I don't like God. It's more so to mean that the Enlightenment kind of got rid of this mystical singular center of the universe that was God. That our focus on rationality got rid of this idea that, oh, there is, this man in the sky who guides all of our moral decisions. The rationality kind of replaced God in a lot of people's eyes for how we ought to act, for how we ought to make our decisions. And, that's true in Mill, that's true in Kant, that's true in Rousseau and all of these other theorists, that we kind of didn't really need God after a point, that we were a little bit more preoccupied with the question of how should I be more rational, and how could I be more rational towards making ethical decisions. And that pretty much just left us in this almost existential despair, where if you get rid of God, you need to create another thing that kind of ties the universe together. Because without any sort of higher order level of, thinking about and constructing the universe, it's all very empty. There's a lot of dread that you start to have towards the universe. And people constructed new gods, basically, is what it is. And that's really important. Mostly because, it transcendentalizes these ethics. It makes it almost seem like you're irrational for for not believing that rationality is the highest mode of thought. And in a lot of debates, people will be like, "What do you mean?" It's almost impossible for someone to comprehend that you're not thinking in a rational way, or that you're trying to find something that doesn't confine itself into the normal mode of truth. And this is seen most popularly when people talk about identity politics, that people believe that there's multiple meanings to truth, that there are only certain individuals who are capable of holding truth to something. I as like a white cishet man am not able to talk about the experiences of a trans woman of color, right? Like, I am not privy to that kind of truth. Like, I can understand, I can like interpret some of the information and internalize it, but should I ever give a talk about trans rights? Probably not. Even if I were to read dozens of pieces of literature or go to other lectures, should I be one of those people who is standing on a podium talking about trans rights? Surely I can be an advocate for it, but should I be an educator? Should I be the holder of truth? And the answer to that is probably not. One of the main centers of identity politics is that truth isn't relative, but that there are multiple forms of truth that you are able to have and to experience. So if someone, and that's most commonly seen in the idea of like microaggressions, where certain people feel impacted by words or actions differently than someone else, is essentially how that comes down to. That, which under a very Kantian perspective, you're not going to see that, because if someone acts, there's a single truth to that action. There is this one idea as to how something occurred and how it impacted others, and if you're outside of that, then you are acting irrationally. And so this idea of truth, of this one singular concept of what it is constructed, right? There's like a huge joke in a lot of philosophy communities about everything being a social construct, and that blows people's minds, and they're just like, "Oh, everything's a social construct, man. Oh, cool, I'm Holden Caulfield." But like, everything really is constructed, and that seems like kind of an obvious thing to say, but at the same time, all of our political, social, economic, whatever kind of community you're a part of, there are very much, constructs that are occurring in ways in which you ought to act. This kind of gets a little bit Foucauldian, which is also good, because he's another really important thinker to a lot of debate. But basically, there are operations of power that come from these ideas of truth that are perpetuated in society. So you as a student in school are to, be the passive sitter. You aren't supposed to be, asking disruptive questions or getting the teacher off topic. You are always to, default to the teacher's truth that they are telling you. You're supposed to be sitting there passively. And like, yeah, it's good to be learning, and it's good to be educated by a teacher, but at the same time, like, there are also other ways to be taught. Like, critical pedagogy teaches that you can be a more active participant in your own education and, liberation. That's what Freire talks about, and, Henry Giroux and all of these other critical pedagogy guys and gals talk about with education. And it also does seem kind of weird to have a student be an active participant in their own education, because the truth that we've been told is that a lot of is that a student doesn't know how to act or how to think about their future. A student and someone who's like, under the age of like 20, or even before they finish their like college degree, is like, you're just a kid. You're gonna know better once you're older. You're gonna understand what's going on and all this stuff. But that factors away certain areas in which a student can really, explore education and explore a lot more of the positive and exciting benefits of education from their own, active participation. There is something very rewarding about being able to go out and learn something on your own, or be the one who chooses to do something and to learn something. But that's a little bit of an aside. But it is one of the examples in which there is, in a way, oppression to truth. And that's not to be like a 1984, like, freedom is slavery kind of, like, doublethink thing. But it's just trying to show you that, like, there are ways in which commonly held beliefs do themselves become entrenched within society to cause kind of like forms of control. And so a lot of this can kind of come off to be like pretty like edgy teen kind of things, and that's what Nietzsche gets misconstrued as a lot, is that he's a very pessimistic, very negative theorist. And a lot of instances of his descriptions of society of Germany in the 1800s are drawn upon from very pessimistic ideas. But I also think that there are a lot of very positive aspects to Nietzsche, specifically in how he talks about ways in which the individual is able to kind of liberate themselves and enjoy where they are. If you aren't able to, if power and truth does not, I guess I should back up a little bit. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, which I tend to do a lot, so please bear with me. So, we've talked about truth, and I think that the other main aspect of Nietzsche that we need to talk about is the idea of master-slave morality, which is a really big concept, and I'll talk about a lot more in the next video.